Everybody, welcome to Outlier on Air. This is the podcast where we interview founders, disruptors, and mavens. As always, I'm your host, Ever Gonzalez. On today's episode, we have Christopher Lochhead. He's a serial entrepreneur, author of Play Bigger, and host of Legends and Losers podcast. Christopher, welcome to the show.
Ever, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I've been following your show for quite a while now, and I was telling you offline, it's fantastic. I love how you are curious and interested in all of the guests that you have. And so I to some extent, I think that, I look up to that because that's what I do as well. Our show, Outlier on Air, it started out as a business show, but after, 400 plus episodes, I just have people that I like on the show now. So we've had authors, we've had actresses. I mean, we've had everything in between. And it's people just that I want to get to know and people that have a cool story. And so when I found yours, I was like, man, this is fantastic. So thank you for accepting our invitation to be on our show.
Of course, I'm stoked to be here. I really appreciate your kind words about Legends and Losers. And you and I are brothers in arms that way because one of our mantras is one conversation can change your life. And the skill of being, there's a word ever that we don't hear anymore. And that word is conversationalist.
Yeah.
And I love this term because it's meaningless. Back in the day, whenever the fuck that was, back in the day, people would say, I'm trying to be a better conversationalist. And of course, today, the world we live in is one where, when many people go out to lunch or dinner or go for a walk or sit down at dinner at home or whatever it is, we're all on a thing and we're all not paying attention and all that. And so there's something awesome when you put down the technology, you look at another person like you and I are right now, and we sit down, we say, hey, let's actually try to have an interesting conversation with each other.
And it doesn't happen very often, which is funny because technology kind of opened up all these different doors for us to connect with the world and with other people in, faraway places. And yet we kind of, our conversations, this cool way of getting to know each other is kind of fallen away a little bit, which I'm a little bit sad about. I mean, as great as technology is, and you and I are using it to kind of have this conversation, but I think you're right. At dinner, when I see, mothers and fathers and kids all with their devices, not having those bonding moments, those awesome conversations, it's kind of sad, but I guess it is what it is right now.
So, one of my favorite expressions is too many causes without a rebel.
Nice.
And so this is one of the causes that I'm a rebel for, so to speak. And so, kind of fuck that. Human beings, listen, here's how I unpack it. What is the worst torture you can give to a human being?
I can think of a few, but I don't know. Being alone, I guess, for me would be kind of be horrible.
And so if you think about our society, if somebody's in jail and they're really, bad or misbehaving or whatever it is, we put them in solitary confinement.
Yeah.
And so I find that interesting. Like the worst thing you can do to a human being is lock them in a room alone by themselves. And so what I think that says is you and I as human beings, what we need the most is to be connected, is to be in a relationship. And if you look at all the research says there's no such thing as a lonely centenarian. I've read research recently ever that says that having one good friend can increase your life by over 20%.
Oh, really?
And of course, you and I can't be friends unless we do stuff. And I'll use the word some of the younger folks use today, and we conversate. And so I'm trying to be a good conversationalist. Yesterday, my wife and I went out to lunch with another couple, dear friends of ours, and the guy in the couple is a big car guy, and so he's my car consultant, and I need new tires for my muscle car.
He's the guy.
So the guy. And so I said, hey, TJ, I need some, tire consulting for my Mustang. And so anyway, long story longer, we go out to lunch, the four of us. And when we go out to lunch, you know what we do ever? We put our phones down, we look each other in the face, and we say, hey, how's it going? What's up with your family? What have you been up to? What have you been doing? Maybe we talk a little politics. Maybe we talk about their vacation, whatever it is. And so, yeah, I know that's a lost art, but I think we can bring it back. And doing things and having powerful conversations with people you love, people you find interesting, people who can educate you, that's great. And the other thing I think that's great is conversations have a natural arc to them.
Yeah.
And so I love that. What I love about podcasting is the experience of eavesdropping. The podcasts that I love are ones where you forget you're listening to a podcast and you almost think you're in the conversation yourself. Like somebody will say something, you're like, yeah, I want to know. And you're like, oh shit, I'm not in this I got earbuds in, right? To me, that's a great podcast. And that's why I love this medium, so that we can actually conversate.
Agreed. Yeah, I mean, the best shows, I think, have that kind of mindset. As much as, if I want to learn how to build something, I'm going to go to YouTube. I'm going to listen to podcasts, and it's very specific, very niche. But the stuff that I enjoy the most is interesting people having interesting conversations. And so, again, congrats on the success that you've had with your podcast. Now, it's funny that you mentioned the technology putting the phones away. A lot of people in your neck of the woods are starting to kind of put these smartphones, right, our iPhones, all that stuff, they're starting to get rid of them and going back to flip phones because it's dominating so much of their life right now. And, a lot of these guys are kind of not letting their kids get on there or buy them these iPhones, these smartphones, because I think it's kind of swinging back a little bit slowly, but it's swinging back a little bit where we're putting all this technology back on the shelf so that it's not, ruining some people's lives. I mean, some people are addicted. This is addictive. These shiny, bright things in our pockets that we have everywhere. Great technology. It can be used for good, but I think a lot of us are abusing it in the wrong way.
Yeah, I think that's right. We can get lost in that stuff, and I'm guilty of that too. But I don't blame the technology, right? So I don't think you should get rid of your smartphone. I mean, if you want to, do whatever you want. That's okay. Yeah. But I think it's like this. Do you have booze in your house ever?
I do not.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. So this analogy won't go anywhere. But so let me talk about.
Pretend I did. That's right.
Or let me talk about myself.
I screwed it up for you.
Yeah, it's okay. I get screwed up all the time. But I'll give you another example. A buddy of mine, Skip Jansen. He's a longtime recovering alcoholic, and when he was on Legends and Losers, I asked him if there was booze in his house, and he said, yeah. And I said, well, how is that for you? And he goes to AA meetings almost daily, and he's been sober for a very long time. He's very committed. And he said, look, just because it's in the house doesn't mean I have to use it. He said, my wife, Jackie, has tampons and all these other things that are for her, and I don't use those either. And so I guess my point is, if we can teach ourselves how to love the technology, use it for what we really get value out and that makes us happy and productive and successful, but also develop a little bit of discipline to say, hey, I'm going to turn this effing thing off. Yeah. I turn mine off at night.
And not a lot of people can do that.
Just turn it off. Just turn it off at dinner. And I don't care what happens. I don't care what happens in politics. I don't care what happens. I'm going to sit down, have a good time, spend some time with my family, my friend, whatever it is, right? So just turn the damn thing off every once in a while.
Good. It's one of those things that I struggle with as well, and I'm getting better at it. But now that I see that my oldest kid is 10, right? He's kind of I don't know if he's ready for a phone, but we're actually starting to think about some sort of phone, and so now I'm focusing a little bit more on what kids are doing with their phones, and even the parents and all that stuff. So anyway, it's one of those things that I think we're going to get a little bit right and a little bit wrong, and we're just going to go with it.
Yeah.
Now let's. I want to paint a picture for our audience, right? For this episode, now what you've done in the past, entrepreneurship. I'm assuming a lot of big wins, a lot of losses. We want to get into that, but to paint the picture, I want to kind of read your little bio here a little bit. Your experience includes 30 years as a Silicon Valley CMO. You've been an advisor, coach, board director for over 50 venture-backed startups. I mean, that's a big deal. I don't care who you are, what you're doing. That's a big deal, what you've done in the past. Why podcasting? Why books? right now? You could be doing just about anything else in the world. Why this now?
Yeah, and certainly things that would be a lot more lucrative, I'll tell you.
That's right. That's right. No doubt.
Podcasting and authoring, at least for me, has been a little bit of a money pit, but that's totally fine. The short answer is 2 years ago when my first book came out, I hung up my gloves, or I actually should say my pads. I hung up my gloves as a player, so to speak, in 2006. And then I was a coach, advisor, consultant, board type guy from 2006 to 2016. And then when my book Play Bigger came out, I hung all that up and said, I'm done. And so for me, my book was my first book anyway was a period at the end of a career, and I just wanted to do different things. And so I took 6 months off. And the unbelievable thing about that ever was I could interact with people who were reading and buying my book in a way that I never would have been able to if I was still hustling in my business with my partners. And that was great. I mean, you know what it's like as a podcaster to get emails from somebody in, some country that you hardly ever think about, who says your book changed my life, or something wonderful that they say. And so that was really cool. I spent 6 months just surfing and having a good time and enjoying my friends and family and doing some promotion for the book and interacting with readers of the book. And then a good buddy of mine who's also an entrepreneur, a guy named Colin Vincent, he'd been bugging me for a long time to start a podcast. And I sort of had mixed feelings about it. We can talk about that if you want. But anyway, the net of it is, after about 6 months, primarily because of Colin and the response to the book, people said, hey, we want more. We'd love to hear, I thought, all right, let's do a podcast and see what happens. And so, that was a year and a quarter ago. And I've just been completely knocked over by how great doing a podcast is.
For sure. Now, was it like that in the beginning, or was it you fell in love with it right away, or has it grown on you? Because it's not easy. It's not the funnest thing to do with the editing. Even if you're sending it out to your team to do all that stuff, there's some non-fun things about podcasting. So did it kind of win you over right away, or has it been a gradual kind of love affair?
I loved it from the beginning, and I love it more now. We launched in February 2017. We're about 150, a little over 150 episodes in.
Congrats.
Thank you. And I love it more now. I mean, I loved it then. You're right. It's more work than I thought it was going to be. And I have a new book coming out, and we're launching a spin-off podcast of Legends and Losers. And so I find myself, quote unquote, working a lot more than I thought. But, I need to ask you, what's another word for work? Because when you say work, it means a certain thing to most people. And nothing that I do today feels like work. So I need a new word for it, because I'm having a blast.
Yeah. It's funny you ask. You're asking the wrong person, right? With what I've done, I don't feel like I'm working at all, and it hasn't been that way for the last 5 years. This podcast has 400 plus episodes. We don't have any sponsors. We don't want any sponsors. We don't make money on the podcast. We make money because of the podcast. And even if nobody was listening to my show, I would still do it, right? Even if nobody was downloading it, nobody was listening, I would do it just because of the connections that I have with the people that I have on the show, right? A lot of these people that I have on the show, I invite back to be speakers at our events, or sometimes we partner up on different projects, and it's fantastic. So again, work, I don't know what that is. It's been a while, but no, I hear you. I'm more in love with podcasting now. I think I at this point, I thought maybe I'd be burned out by now, and I'm ready for another 400 for sure.
And like sometimes we shoot 3 episodes in a week, because I don't know when I get an opportunity to speak to 4-star General Stanley McChrystal, like I'm fired up to do that.
That's right.
And actually, it's funny. I'd be curious to ask you. We source the vast majority of our guests through our own personal networks, mine and the team's. And so it's always hard when somebody from out, we don't know wants to come on the podcast, it's just a hard thing to because I'm trying to figure out, can I have a legendary conversation with this person, right? And so the only true north I've been able to come up with is, am I like frothing?
Yes.
To talk to, like, would I love to go have beers with this person?
Yeah.
And if the answer is a strong yes, then great. And if the answer is I'm not sure or no, then so I got to be frothing to sit down and it turns out there's a lot of people I'm frothing to sit down and talk to. And as you know, I mean, I've been amazed when we started Legends and Losers. To me, there were a couple questions. One was, would people be willing to have the kinds of free range, truly authentic, no bullshit conversations about success and failure? That's the name.
Yeah.
And so A, would people be willing to do that? B, would I like it? And C, of course, would there be an audience? And so, we tried to figure out whether those things were true. And to be candid, I thought, I might run out of people to talk to in three or 4 months. And so far, at least, knock on wood, that hasn't happened.
Every time we bring somebody on to have them as a guest, I think I asked you this morning, or right before we came on, if there's anything you don't want us to bring up or talk about. And most people are like, no, I'm open, which surprises me, right? Most people, I'd assume, would say, well, I don't want to talk about numbers. I don't want to talk about, my sex addiction, whatever. I don't care what it was. But most people are
There's
saying,
this weird thing growing in my ear I'd rather not talk about right now.
Right. But people are like, no, let's talk about it. It's okay. And so it surprised me. But I think that they understand that. I think maybe they're hungry for those type of conversations, right? Where they're free to it. I hate using this word because I hate this term, but I'm hoping that I'm building somewhat of a safe space, even though thousands of people are watching the times. They feel comfortable, and I'd like to think that I make them comfortable being able to have those conversations, sometimes difficult conversations. But you kind of go back to what you said a little bit earlier when you're talking about, man, do I really want this person on my show? In the beginning, we used to take just about anybody just because, we were just starting off. Now that we have a little bit more clout, now that we can kind of be a little bit more, picky and choosy about who we have on the show, we turn people away. And even then, sometimes my gut feeling says, even though they're accomplished or might have a good story, my gut says no. And when we have them on the show anyway, it's not a good show. I mean, it's not a good episode, right? No matter, I don't care how big their name is. If I wasn't into it 100%, I can tell, and I'm assuming that our audience can tell as well. We've had one of those recently, and I'm a little embarrassed about it, but whatever. We're going to keep it up because that's the way it is. So we can't bat 1,000, but we certainly try.
And I'd be curious your experience, because given the longevity and success of your podcast, I would imagine this is the case. It's starting to be the case for us, which is we could essentially have a very well known to celebrity level person on every episode if we chose to.
Yeah.
And that's not, I don't care if you're, some big Hollywood ding dong or some big giant billionaire or whatever you are. If you're not willing, here's what I know to echo your point. I think there is an opposite and equal reaction to the level of bullshit and inauthenticity in the world. And so for every stupid Kardashian ass selfie, there's an equal and opposite reaction. I also think, particularly in the business podcast world there's so many hosts that play a character. Yeah. They're not themselves. They're like, hey, welcome to the, we're going to do and all that, and they have this.
Why don't you list them? Tell it. I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Well, I'll throw one under the bus. I think Gary Vee's a douchebag. I think he's a business Kardashian. I think all he cares about is himself. And I think advice like hustle and get on Snapchat is stupid and dangerous advice. And so, there's just a lot of this BS, whether it's the Kardashians or a guy like that, or, lots of others. And so I think if people are willing to not play a character, to be themselves, to talk about, we call it the losery, to talk about the losery, to not be overly self-promotional and not take 500 selfies a day and all that bullshit, then I think audiences show up, because I was a fan of podcasts like that long before I ever became a podcaster.
I like that. It sounds like we kind of have similar interests and similar ways of running our show. Not that we would turn all of them away, but if there was a big name, and we've had a few that want to come on the show to talk about their book or talk about their next move, but they've been on 50 other shows and each show is the same thing. I'm like, you know what? Yes. I would love to have you on the show if you want to talk about real things. But if you're going to come in here and just read your script, I'm all right. Thanks. I'll pass.
Yeah.
Just because nobody wants to listen to that anymore, especially if you've done it over and over again.
Absolutely right. And I don't give a shit about your talking points.
Yeah,
I really don't. I want to have, and I know this word is overused, so maybe we should use a different word, but I want to have as authentic a conversation with somebody as possible. And look, of course, if you're bringing somebody on, their area of expertise is a big part of why you're bringing them on. And you want to hear about their shit. And if they wrote about that in their book, then you want to hear about it. But to your point, Ever, what you don't want, what I don't want, and what I don't think anybody wants to listen to is all the pre-canned stuff. And look, we all have some pre-canned stuff, of course, but and there's some key things you want to get across about some key ideas. If it's in your book or whatever it is, you're a thought leader of any kind. But at the same time, can we just talk to each other like human beings?
So what about those canned shows, though? I mean, I'm sure we can list them. We won't if you don't want to, but some of those are some of the popular ones dominating iTunes right now. So there must be an audience, or is it just quantity over quality type of thing that's going on in the podcasting industry? I can't figure it out. I mean, not that I spend too much time on it, but
here's what I think's going on. I'll give you an example. By chance, have you been to Italy ever?
I have not Italy, no.
So Italy's my favorite country in Europe, and my personal taste, best food in the world. I'm married to an Italian woman. The whole family cooks, and it's just that I love that food. So you can go to what's that? Oh yeah, you can go to Olive Garden.
Yes.
Okay. And if you've spent your whole life going to Olive Garden and that's your definition of Italian food, you might actually say that you like Olive Garden, right? And here's what I'm telling you. You could eat at Olive Garden 1,000 times, and the first time you go to Tuscany and you walk into a family-owned restaurant and the dad is the front end serving you, and the mom is cooking with the son and all that, and they bring out the local wine and they have homemade pot and all that. You have this aha moment where you go, holy fuck, the Olive Garden is a piece of shit.
That's right.
And so, look, and I'll pick on him because he's so popular. Great, Gary Vee's popular. But listening to that idiot tell you to hustle and have a Snapchat account and somehow think that you're going to build a business, sooner or later, people realize, hey, wait a minute, this is the Olive Garden. This is bullshit. Yeah. And the 7 things and the 4 tips and all that stuff. And look, I understand it, and sometimes making. I don't want to be. I don't want to swipe it all with one hand. There is some candy that can be valuable.
Sure.
But in general, most of the entrepreneur porn is stupid. And so my point is, after you go to Italy, you will never eat at the Olive Garden again. And I think that's what's going on.
I can see that. A lot of churn, right? A lot of this is their kind of the entry into podcasting and business and entrepreneurship. But then once they kind of stick around a little bit longer, then they realize that, hey, there's not a lot of substance here, or it's the same old. Then they graduate to different shows and different things. This is perfect for you just because you've built real businesses. You've been in the trenches, right? With marketing and all this other stuff that you're doing that we're going to get into here in just a bit. But now I'm afraid that in podcasting, right, we seem to want to be these media influencers, right? And so the business a lot of times is me, and now the business is you because you're a podcaster and a book and you are the brand and all that good stuff. I think there's a lot of fluff to that. And so I'm afraid that I'm going to go down a path that, man, this is fake. Man, what am I really selling? Right. I mean, again, I'm not selling ads on my show. I don't want to just do things to get likes and hits and that's it. And so I wake up at times thinking, oh man, this is a slippery slope. Is this for real? And now you're in this world too. So, and you've been in both. What do you think?
So here's what I think. If you do this stuff, millennials, by way of example, report the number one thing they want in life is fame. And that is such a bummer to me, right? And so if you're one of those people, and you can tell on a podcast or on any other medium that the person's playing a character, right? It's like, I'm sure you've had this situation. You and I, before you went live, were just chit-chatting, getting ready. And I've had these experiences, I know you have, where there's that chit-chat ahead of time. And then, boom, you're on air, you're live, whatever it is. And then the person goes, and they become this character, and they have all these stupid catchphrases. And they're like, and you sit there and go,
what happened?
Dude, like, who are you, bozo, the business clown? Like, what the fuck are you doing? And they espouse all this shit, and it's just re-swizzled Dale Carnegie crap or whatever it is, right? And so, anyway, I think to answer your question, the real issue is, what's your point of view? What problem do you think you're solving? What's your raison d'etre for doing all this shit? And I think a lot of these folks, their raison d'etre for doing this shit is to get followers on Twitter. And my friend Tony Chan, the incredible entrepreneur and venture capitalist who you should have on, he wrote an amazing book called Good People. He said, the job of leaders is not to create followers. It's to create other leaders.
Yeah. I love that.
And so, at least for me, Legends and Losers is the podcast I wanted to listen to. I'm the biggest fan of the show. I'm a complete dork. When we drop a new episode, I like run to my phone and press play, and I forget that I'm on the podcast. I listen to the show because I'm dying to hear it. And so, look, I think if you're doing something you love, I think if you know what your raison d'etre, what your true north is, what problem you're trying to solve, what difference you're trying to make, and if that's your primary motivation, I think that's very different than, these buffoons who play characters who are trying to be business porn star Kardashians.
Yeah, which there are a ton. I don't think many of them stick around too much, too long, but they kind of weed themselves out a little bit. Now,
the other thing that they make me laugh, do you know who this guy, I'll throw another one under the bus that I think.
I love this. I'm taking notes.
Do you know who Ty Lopez is?
I do.
Yeah. And like, look, I don't know.
I don't get it. Like, I don't get it at all.
Well, you know who he reminds me of? Because everything I've ever seen of him, he's like, a Bentley is taking him to a jet or something. He's that sort of a bozo.
Yeah.
And do you remember Tom Vu?
I don't.
So best I can tell, Tom was the pioneer of the infomercial in the United States in the 80s. If you go onto YouTube and type in Tom, I think it's just VU if I'm not mistaken. And he would stand there and there would be literally 15 gals in bikinis. And he would be on some giant yacht and he would be talking about his real estate training class.
Yeah. Nice.
And how you could be, doing nothing right now, or you could be learning how to make money in real estate. And there's these gals in like bikinis walking around behind him. And then he has other ones where he's got like Bentleys and all, and it's just so ridiculous. And like, no kidding, he ended up getting busted for tax evasion and, all this sort of bullshit stuff. Yeah. And so I just look at these idiots like a Ty Lopez who are like trying to flaunt some fantasy of success and Bentleys and boobies and shit and just go like, who consumes this? Like at what level of IQ do you have to be? What stupid entrepreneur looks at that stuff and this guy barking at them with the Bentleys and thinks this is somebody that I want to emulate or learn from?
It's getting rich and famous quick. That's why he has so many followers, right? You mentioned that the fame is the number one thing for millennials, and that's too bad. It's just like these coaches that coach other coaches on how to coach, and it's just kind of a cycle there where I don't get a lot of that stuff, and there are days when I'm afraid that that all the people that are out there, that's all they want to hear, and that's all the stuff that's making money, and so. But we're trying to stay true and stay the course with what we're doing here, and I think we're doing a decent job so far. Let's get into your book a little bit. Kind of shifting gears, you're all about the niche, the category, and one of the things that kind of stood out was you saying, or in the book, winning today isn't about beating the competition at the old game. It's about inventing a whole new game, defining a new market category, developing it, and dominating over time. Sounds great, good advice, easier said than done. For the solopreneurs, for the young entrepreneurs that are listening right now, what does that mean to them? What should that mean to them?
So I know it's easy to hear that and think, okay, well, that's great if you're Google, but what if you're a neighborhood carpenter? And so my advice to solopreneurs, my advice to people in their careers is this idea of designing and dominating a category is as applicable for you as it is for Facebook and Google and Microsoft. And here's my evidence. I would ask you to think about the following. Everybody we admire and every company we admire has some things in common. And generally those things are those people and or companies are original. They broke and took new ground. They are, by definition, different. And my dream ever, you talk about, okay, so why do this? My dream is that one day people will acknowledge and employ and empower what the exponential power of what makes them different as opposed to the incremental power of what makes them better. And we live in a world that tells you to be better. Well, Muhammad Ali wasn't better. He was different. Mm-hmm. Picasso wasn't better. He was different. And then, to get specific in business, do you want me to give you an example?
Absolutely. Yes.
So, my friend Heather Clancy and I are working on our new book. It's called Niche Down. It's about how solopreneurs, how individuals and small businesses can create and dominate categories. So I'll give you an example of a couple of companies that I love that we've fallen in love with as we worked on this book. So there's a guy named John McDonald who lives in the LA area, and he was working as a screenwriter. And anyway, he decided he was going to go and do some work in carpentry, and he started buying stuff and fixing it up and selling it at the local markets in LA. And one day a person came by at his I don't know what they call them. My wife goes to the one here in the Bay Area. It's the first Sunday of the month every month. Yeah, I call it the Junk Fest, but I know that's not. They would kill me. But it's that. It's the outdoor thing in the lot in the parking lot where everybody gets a market of some sort.
Yeah.
So he was at one of these things, and he had refurbished some shit or whatever he had done, and somebody said to him, "Hey, have you ever thought of doing custom cabinetry on the front end of IKEA stuff?" Well, ta-da, John McDonald niched down. So today he's the founder and CEO of a company called Semi-Handmade, and they're on all the hot lists, the Inc. lists, all the stuff. They are killing it, and they are the category designer and now category king of a new niche called, you ready for this? The IKEA hacking niche. And here's what Semi-Handmade does. Let's say you want to refurb your kitchen and want to make it all nice and sexy and new and whatever. You go to IKEA and you buy your cabinets and whatever it is at IKEA, but you don't get the front end piece, the doors and the stuff that you and I see. You buy the back end piece, and then you contact Semi-Handmade and you say, hey, listen, I'm doing this. I have these cabinets. I have this, I have that. And I want your beautiful, sexy front end shit on the IKEA shit. And they have technology on their website, and the IKEA folks know who they are, and and so basically what you end up with is IKEA on the back end, which, as you know, is very functional, good, reasonably good quality stuff, but with this high-end custom.
That's cool.
Right. And they're killing it. And so for a fraction of the cost of custom cabinetry and other things, you get this awesome stuff. That's a great example of a niche down. Can I share another one with you that I love?
Yes, please.
So we just dropped this episode of Legends and Losers with, I'm going to say, is the greatest father and son entrepreneur team in history, and maybe the single greatest inspiring entrepreneur story I've ever heard. So John is in his early 20s. His dad, Mark, John Cronin and Mark Cronin. Mark has been an educator and an entrepreneur and has had a very kind of eclectic, interesting life. And when John graduated high school, Mark says to John, "What do you want to do?" And John says, "Dad, I want to start a business with you." So they have a couple ideas. I could tell you what their first ideas were. They're kind of funny, but they end up starting this company called John's Crazy Socks. You could check them out at johnscrazysocks.com. I don't have any financial interest in the business. They although I will say they've become the official sock supplier to Legends and Losers.
Nice.
And they're about a year and a half old and they are killing it. So much so that I don't know if you remember when George H.W. Bush went to his wife's funeral, which of course had the whole country in tears. Mm-hmm. He was wearing John's Crazy Socks.
Oh, I remember seeing pictures of that. Like, cause they're not obviously normal. They're not the dark normal dress socks.
I forget what color they were, but they were bright, and they,
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing I haven't told you. John, the son, has Down syndrome, and they have about 30 employees, and about a third, I may get the numbers wrong, but roughly a third of them are what Mark calls differently abled.
Oh, really?
And this is one of the most inspiring businesses ever. Now, why is it an incredible niche down? First of all, a sock company focusing exclusively on a niche called Crazy Socks is an interesting niche down in of itself. And as you know, many people could look at Down syndrome in I'll say, less than positive way. They could be a victim of it. They could be upset. There could be woe is me. The family could say, "Oh, why the fuck did this?" Whatever, right? There's a lot of people who could go there, and instead, they did the opposite. John's living his life. He's full on, and they are, essentially turning what most people would view, or some people could view, as a negative into a huge positive. And they've created a whole new niche, and they've got presidents, and they have the Canadian Prime Minister as a customer, awesome. and they're absolutely killing it. So that's another one. And then I'll give you one other that I'm in love with right now. They haven't been on Legends and Losers. I don't know them, but I love it. It's these two gals, Dina Tripp and Debbie Schwartz. They are the founders of a bakery. Now, as you know, things like restaurants and bakeries and small businesses like that have a huge failure rate. Why? Because they're completely undifferentiated, and they're not doing category design. So these two gals, they don't just open a bakery and call it Dina and Debbie's Bakery. That's not what they do. They design their own category, and they pull, if you'll allow me this much jargon, a full-on niche down. You know what their business is called?
No clue.
Nothing Bundt Cake. And they are the world's largest franchise chain of Bundt Cake bakeries. There's, if I'm remembering right, there's about 250 of them. You can check it out on their website. And so by niching down and focusing on Bundt cakes, they built a very differentiated business, and now they have all these franchisees, and it's working. And there's one in my neighborhood. So instead of opening a generic bakery, they think very carefully about how they want to position the business in the world, and they design a new niche. They niche down, and now they dominate that niche. And here's the interesting thing about that. If you had hired, and I hate to throw them under the bus, but if you'd hired McKinsey and said, "Hey, listen, See if you can find a new category niche in bakeries for us. I don't think 25 khaki pant wearing management consultants are going to come up with this idea.
And Harvard MBAs, right? It's it's not going to happen.
Well, and Mark, the dad, co-founder of John's Crazy Socks, we had this conversation on Legends and Losers. They didn't do any market stuff. They didn't do any of that. They had an inclination. They had a hunch, like a lot of great entrepreneurs. And he and his son jumped off the high dive and did a cannonball into the Crazy Socks niche, and now they're dominating it. And so I guess
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. You go ahead, please.
I was going to say, early in my career, once I stopped being employed and started building my own companies and different things like that, I thought it was the opposite. Cast a wide net, right? And then I try to touch and affect the most people, the most businesses, and then that's where the money is. But obviously, as I've progressed in the last 10, 15 years or so, it's the niche, right?
It's all about the niche.
Right? For sure.
Well, yeah, and there's a crazy, it's a mind fuck of a dichotomy about niching down. I'll give you another example to explain it. I have a friend named Jen Groover, and Success Magazine calls Jen a one-woman brand. You should have her on too. She's unbelievable. I'm completely in love with her. And she, early on in her career, she grew up in the Philly area, if I'm remembering right. She ends up working at QVC and doing on-air stuff at QVC. So she's doing that, and she's the mother of twins. And at the time, her twins were young, and she's at the grocery store, and she's got to pay for her groceries, and she's going through her purse, her bag. And I guess she's got all sorts of, kid shit and diapers and, and her wallet and whatever I don't know about you, but women's bags are a giant black hole to me. I'm always terrified.
For sure.
Right. Are you like me when your gal says, hey, could you go to get something out of my, I'm like, I'm terrified to go in there.
No, I just bring the entire purse over to her. That's what I do.
That's what I do too. She's not going to be happy if I dump it on the table. So it's like, okay, baby, here it is. Anyway, so Jen has this moment, and her kids are upset. There's people behind her, and she can't find her credit card. And she has, like all great entrepreneurs, she has this aha around a problem, which is, why am I carrying around this giant tub of a bag that doesn't allow me to organize my life? And I feel like an idiot, and et cetera, et cetera. And so, ta-da. She becomes the creator of this invention called the Butler bag. And her vision is, why not create a functional bag that has different compartments and is well organized for the modern woman, but that also is fashionable and looks great because, she's a gal that likes to be fashionable and so forth. And so she invents this Butler bag and she launches it, and it's now $1 million plus a year product line. So Jen Groover, becomes known as the Butler bag gal. And if you Google Butler bag or Jen Groover, one or the other gets associated with one or the other immediately. Well, here's the interesting thing. Jen has a clothing line. She is a co-founder of a business with Tiki Barber in the sports and media space. She's an author. She likes to be called Groover. Groover is a legendary keynote speaker. She travels around the world. So by niching down and being known for the Butler bag and having huge success there, it allowed her to do more things in fashion. Yeah. And now she speaks and writes, and she does these other businesses. And when you read her resume, it's like you can't even believe it's one person. It's like Groover's had 15 lives. And so my point is just echoing your point, which is, somehow by niching down and dominating a category that you design, if you get that one right, it then allows you to play in a bigger way.
Agreed. That
if you hadn't niched down and owned that niche, you wouldn't have been able to. And if you were Groover and you started off and said, I want to do all these things, you probably would have failed. But by starting with the niche around the Butler bag and expanding out from there, bam.
And I think it's one of those things, right? I mentor at the local university, and I talk to a lot of young students and entrepreneurs, and it doesn't make sense to them, and it doesn't sound right. And I think this is one of those lessons I think that you're going to have to learn on your own, right? Because if you hear some older dude saying, "Hey, go as narrow as you possibly can."
Who are you calling older ever?
Right? It's one of those things that's just like me. I had a father-in-law who was successful in business, and I ignored half of the things that he told me. I had to learn them myself. And I think a lot of these younger entrepreneurs, even though there's a lot of books on different topics, a lot of great advice, a lot of good podcasts, they're going to have to deal with a lot of these mistakes and a lot of these experiences themselves. And I think as much as it's going to suck and it's going to take time and resources and all that good stuff, I think at the end it's okay. It's going to make them a stronger individual, a stronger, more prepared entrepreneur, eventually leader, CEO, that kind of stuff. And so, it's good and bad, I think.
Yeah, it is good and bad. I think the decline of Western civilization started with the invention of that little plastic protector that we stick in the wall socket. That was, to me, the beginning of helicopter parenting. Not that I want children to get electrocuted. Of course I don't. But when you and I were kids, those things didn't exist. And I don't know about you, but I jam my finger into the light socket and you go, ooh! And you go, okay, we're not doing that again, right? And so there's real value to electrocuting yourself or skinning your own knees. At the same time, I think we live in the greatest time ever, because there are podcasts, because there are amazing books coming out all the time, because there's TED Talks and so many incredible things on YouTube, and Stanford and Harvard and MIT and lots of the big European and Asian, and there are all these incredible universities that put all this insane. You can essentially get an MBA online if you want one for free almost, and so we just live at a time where there's no excuse for being stupid. And I think smart people can and do learn from other people's mistakes. I try super hard to. And so, yeah, maybe it's a bit of a dichotomy as well. There's real value to skinning your own knees and electrocuting yourself. And if you can truly internalize the learnings of others who have kind of walked some of the path that you want to walk, and be smart enough to not skin your knee on the same things, at least skin your knee on new things, right?
With your background and talk about Tai Lopez and those type of things, I'm trying to figure out if creating your own niche and doing all this stuff, if you build it, will they come, or do we need to be experts and really good at the marketing part of it? Right? We talked about the socks, we talked about the Butler bag, all that stuff. If it wasn't for marketing, would we even be talking about these things right now? Because there are a lot of great marketers that have nothing behind them. There's no, it's all fluff. There's no substance. So where's the line, and how does that work with each other?
Yeah, great question. The way we think about it in both play bigger and niche down, and the way I just think about it in life is we call it prosecuting the magic triangle, and that's a fancy way of saying getting product, company, and category right. And most entrepreneurs are focused on product, and company. That is to say, if I build a legendary product, if I have a good business model, and I build a good business and a good culture, and I price right, and I'm available where my customers need to be available. So I build a great company, I build a great product, and everything else will work. Well, build it and they will come is probably the most damaging entrepreneurial idea ever. Because if you study the legends, and I have, here's the aha. What Picasso and Steve Jobs and Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx, what they did intuitively was nothing like most of us consider marketing. They taught the world and the sort of, if you will, the target audience, or the avatar, to use, the avant-garde language and thinking of who their prospective customer was. They taught them to think differently about a problem and therefore a solution.
I like that.
And when the world, or at least the world they were trying to communicate with, understood and agreed with the problem and solution as they designed it, they either create a new category or redesign an existing one. Here's a simple example. Reed Hastings, founder of Netflix, he lives here in Santa Cruz, amazing entrepreneur. Well, when he started Netflix, the quote-unquote problem of how do I get a video into my house had been solved. We drive to Blockbuster, They more than likely don't have what we want. We pay a late fee. We pick something else that we have to argue with our family about because nobody, right? And then we drive home pissed off because we have a late fee and not the movie that we wanted, but we got a movie. And we never thought about it. That's just how it was for the better part of,
for sure.
That was life. And Reed and the Netflix folks reimagined the problem in the context of new technology. And they said, well, in the beginning, why don't you go to a website, tell us all the movies that you love, and we'll mail them to you. And of course, today we stream them over the internet. And so by redesigning the problem in the context of the new technology, and then educating the world about a new way of thinking about how do I get a video to my house, when that happens, Blockbuster literally goes out of business.
Yeah.
If you look at Semi-Handmade as an example, they've created a whole new niche of cabinetry that looks very high-end, super ding-dong, but is incredibly cost-effective. Well, nobody had thought about that before. It's a whole new thing, this quote-unquote IKEA hacking niche, right? And now they dominate it. And so legendary entrepreneurs, they don't stop, to get back to the magic triangle ever, they don't stop at product and company. Yes, look, we live in a time, if John's semi-handmade goods were crappy, didn't look good, didn't function, weren't beautiful, nobody'd buy them. You got to have a great product. But what the legends understood always is that we don't attack an existing market. We teach the market to think the way we want them to. And if enough people agree with us, bam, we hit a tipping point and a new niche, a new category emerges. And that is to say, people agree with the problem. And if they agree with the problem, they have to have the solution. And if you're the educator about the problem, they buy the solution from you. And so, yes, on one level, of course, that's marketing, but it's not marketing in the traditional sense.
So are these people that we've discussed that are doing it and obviously seem to be doing it right and they're successful at this point? You've done this quite a bit as well. Are you just wired differently? Is this something that you've learned throughout your career? Can it be taught? I'm assuming it can be taught, but I think some of us are just born with it. What do you say about the, being born with it as opposed to learning it, and where do we all fall in?
So I think most of us are not natural outliers. Some of us are. In this regard, I am. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I don't say that to just like chest pound. There's some real liabilities to being somebody who is at the core profoundly different. Life's not always easy for me. It's hard. Remember that old Kermit the Frog song? It's not easy being green.
That's right.
In a world where everybody's purple and you're green, or maybe a very small number of people are green, it can be very hard being green. It can be not easy being green. And so I'm just different in a lot of ways from a lot of people. And sometimes I feel like an alien on planet Earth. And I know a lot of outliers feel that way. I have, I call it dysfucklia. I have 4 or 5 diagnosed, dyscalculia, dyslexia, executive function disorder, ADHD, bipolar. I got a whole collection of these things. And so,
and if you notice, though, a lot of the most successful CEOs, entrepreneurs have some of those as well. I mean, there's a high number of them.
It is a disproportionate number if you start to look at what little data is available in this regard. For sure, most of it's anecdotal. A lot of it's anecdotal, but it does seem that there's a disproportionate number of dyslexics and dysfucklias in those positions. But that said, more importantly, to get back to your question, we live in a world where we get trained on 2 things. One, the path to success is to be better. If you want to make the basketball team, be better than everybody else. If you want to make it into the law school of your choice, do better than everybody on the LSAT, et cetera, et cetera. And when you really look at the most successful people, and more importantly than even success, the people you and I admire the most, they didn't make anything incrementally better. They were fundamentally different, and as a result, they made a leap happen. And so the aha is, well, there are certain areas where you can apply being better to have some success, like the ones I mentioned. But breakthrough success, breakthrough happiness in life, I believe, comes from embracing what makes you different. Now, if you're willing to have the courage to be different, then you're willing to look at things differently. My friend John Bielenberg, the legendary designer, he's won over 250 design awards, including the Lifetime Design Award from the American Academy of Graphic Arts. He wrote an amazing book called Think Wrong. And he taught me this ever. By the way, if you want an introduction to John, I'd be happy to introduce you. Yes. Incredible guy. And here's what he taught me. And he taught me this over 20 years ago. And it's a simple way that everybody can kind of access category design, access their difference, the courage to be different. If you take any given situation and you say, okay, I'm in this situation, good, bad, in between, whatever it is, personal, professional, whatever it is. You ask yourself the question, what would most people do in this situation? And you sort of play it forward a little bit. Well, most people do this, and then, okay, great. What's the exact opposite of that? And be ludicrous with it. Now, you might not do the exact opposite, but what it will do when you ask yourself that question, what's the wrongest thing? I don't even know if that's a word, but what's the most wrong thing you could do here? What's the most backward, upside down, asinine, stupid, crazy, creative thing you could do here? Okay, ask yourself that question and play that forward. Now, you're probably not going to do that because it's probably asinine, but it might open something tangential. It might open a new door. And so, if you think about the gals who started Nothing Bundt Cake, you say, okay, well, what does everybody who wants to be a baker and own their own bakery do? Well, you could answer that question. And they somewhere intuitively, and I don't know these gals, okay, but intuitively somehow they understood, if we focused, we for whatever reason, we like these bundt cakes. And if we focused here, that would be a way to distinguish ourselves, to differentiate. And people forget the root word in differentiate is different, right? And so what makes you different, not better? Because what most bakers do is they say, hey, we bake the best chocolate cake in town. And they do the Coke Pepsi thing, right?
Yeah.
For decades, Pepsi said we taste better than Coke, and Pepsi has never caught Coke and never will, right? And so they have this dumbass comparison conversation. They compete in a traditional sense. And you've heard the term bake-off. That's where the fucking term comes from. So they said, we're not going to participate in the bake-off, the better conversation. We want to have a different conversation. So we're going to say, hey, listen, we think bundt cakes are awesome, and distinguish ourselves to become known for a niche we can own. As opposed to generic bakery, we're going to niche down, focus, design our own market category around bundt cakes. And look, they might sell chocolate cake that isn't bundt cake today, to the discussion we had earlier on expanding. I don't know what the fuck they sell. Yeah. But they intuitively understood this. And then they taught the world why going to a bundt cake place solves a unique problem, why it's differentiated, why it's fun, why it's exciting. And I bet they have pretty good cake. But they didn't fall into... Can I tell you a story about this? So you're getting me frothed up. There's a mistake.
The way we like it.
Yeah. There's a mistake that most people make in their careers, and certainly as youpreneurs or solopreneurs, or there's this mistake that people make, and around here we now call it the something about Mary mistake. Do you remember this movie ever?
Yes, I do.
So there's this great scene in the movie where Stiller is in a car, and he picks up this hitchhiker, and the hitchhiker is a serial killer played by an absolutely piss your pants funny comedian named Harlan Williams. And I've seen Harlan live in San Jose, and he's pretty much as good as it gets if you get a chance to see him. Anyway, what happens in the scene is the two of them are sitting in the front of the car and they're driving, and I guess they get talking about life, and Stiller says, kind of what's your, I forget the exact question, but so like, what are you up to? What's your plan? How are you going to make it in life? What's your plan for success? Whatever he says. And Stiller's and Harlan's character says to him, he goes, that infomercial, 6-minute abs? I'm going to do 5-minute abs. And he goes off about why 5-minute abs is going to kick 6 minutes abs ass and this and that and the other. And Stiller looks at him and goes, well, that sounds great there, Harlan. But what happens when someone comes out with 4-minute abs? And Harlan, convulses and doesn't have an answer. And virtually every entrepreneur is doing 4-minute abs.
Sure.
And here's the interesting thing about that. Categories tend to get dominated by one company. So for Play Bigger, we did a set of analysis in the tech space, but we think it applies to many others. We can talk about the details behind the data science if you want. But the net of it is we studied every tech company in America founded from 2000 to 2015. And we asked the question, what percentage of total value created that is as measured by market cap or valuation? So the value of the companies in the category. Okay. So if you take all the companies in a given category, you add up how much the company's worth, and that gives you one number. Then you say, okay, what percentage of that number goes to the category queen or king, the company that dominates the space? In tech, that number is 76%. So whether we like it or not, we are increasingly living in a winner-take-all world where category queens dominate. And so the mistake that most entrepreneurs make is they make the something about Mary mistake, which is they enter a category that was designed by somebody else, that somebody else dominates with we're 4-minute abs and they're 6-minute abs.
So how do we think different then? Because you're right. That's all we've seen at the university with the show, with the events that we have. Everybody is doing the 5-minute abs, right? Yeah. So it must be a mindset or something that we can do or teach so that we, again, think different, or we can kind of get out of that rut, it feels like.
Yes, and there's a whole bunch of ways to do that. I'm happy to unpack it at whatever level of detail that you want. But one of the great joys in my life is discovering and, if you will, co-creating with many colleagues over the better part of 30 years how to do exactly what you just said. Because if I have one superpower, my superpower is I'm a category designer. And so somehow I understood this very early in my career. And well, actually, I know the reason, because I don't fit in. Mm-hmm. I grew up on the island of misfit toys. I couldn't play the game I can't read a spreadsheet. So for me to be successful in business, I got thrown out of school at 18 for being stupid and started a company, right? Like I had to have a different path because the paths that were in front of me, I couldn't participate in. So I had to have a different path. And so over time, you learn how to do this, which is to say, how do you teach people to do nothing but cake? How do you teach people to do different versus better? And, in Play Bigger, we unpack this management discipline of category design, and we do it again in niche down for individuals and solopreneurs and small businesses. And so if you like, you tell me how much detail you want. But
yeah, no, let's get into a little bit more detail. But I like this because I'm imagining, just like each student, right? There are a lot of kids that fail at the school, elementary, junior high, high school, into the college level just because they're different. They think different. Not that they're dumb, not that they're anything else. It's just they don't fit in that mold. And I think, we can get into another couple hours of discussion in school alone, but it's not working the way it's set up now. And I think it's led to a lot of these people and entrepreneurs that kind of fall in line with what's already there, with these categories that are, like you mentioned, dominated by big money, by companies that have been there before, that are in it. And so, yeah, let's figure out how to kind of break out of that mindset.
So where I would suggest people start is ask yourself the question, what problem do I solve? One of our mantras around here is fall in love with the problem, not the solution. And this word solution has become a very generic sort of word in business. So if you hear people, I try to be a student of languaging ever. That is to say, listen to the words people use, because words create thinking and thinking creates action. And so you hear people say like, oh, yes, we're a full service provider of web design solutions, or whatever it is, right? And you go, first of all, I don't even know what the fuck you said. And the other one, I always think, my insane brain goes, hey, no one buys a solution unless they have a problem. And so you ask an entrepreneur, hey, what problem do you solve? And they can't really tell you. Yeah. So number one, get super grounded in the problem. And what I know about legendary category designers is there's two kinds of problems. There's a problem that the world didn't know it had. And then there's a problem that the world knows it has that gets completely redesigned.